The rising sun painted the ancient stones of Oak Ridge Mountains with gold. The small town in Colorado was waking up slowly, as it had done for generations. Grandma Martha, sitting in her wooden rocking chair on the porch, observed the horizon, while her wrinkled hands prepared tea from herbs collected at the foot of the mountain. "The wind is different today," she murmured to herself, feeling the cold breeze caress her face. Inside the simple but welcoming house, little Moon, 4 years old, played with colorful pebbles that her grandfather, Grandpa Anthony, had collected for her. Her large brown eyes shone with unusual wisdom for someone so young. The wheelchair beside her didn't diminish the enthusiasm with which she organized the stones in patterns only she understood. "Grandma," she called with her sweet voice, "the mountain is singing today." Grandma Martha smiled, entering the room. It wasn't the first time Moon said she could hear the mountain. Since she was a baby, the girl seemed to have a special connection with Oak Ridge Mountains, something beyond common understanding. "And what is it saying, my little one?" she asked, kneeling beside her granddaughter. "That someone is coming back," Moon answered, placing a blue pebble at the center of her arrangement. "Someone who left a long time ago." A shiver ran down Grandma Martha's spine. Her granddaughter's words echoed like an omen. That same morning the phone rang, breaking the tranquil routine of the house. Grandpa Anthony answered, and his face hardened with each word he heard from the other end of the line. When he hung up, he remained silent for a few moments before turning to his wife. "It was Richard," he finally said, his voice heavy. "He's coming back to Oak Ridge. He arrives tomorrow." Grandma Martha felt the weight of those words. Richard, her son, had left 3 years ago after Claire, his wife and Moon's mother, had departed from this world during childbirth. The pain had consumed him so much that he simply disappeared, leaving Moon in the care of her grandparents. "Is he coming alone?" she asked, fearing the answer. "No," answered Grandpa Anthony. "He's bringing a woman. He said he got married again." From the other side of the room, Moon continued her game with stones, apparently oblivious to the adults' conversation. But when she raised her face, there were silent tears running down her cheeks. "The mountain said she isn't good," whispered the girl. The next day, a black car climbed the dusty road leading to the Olivers' house. Richard stepped out first, now 32, his dark hair shorter and his countenance less tormented than when he had left. Behind him, an elegant woman of approximately 28 emerged from the vehicle, her green eyes critically examining the simple property. "Dad, Mom," Richard greeted them with a quick, formal hug. "This is Isabel, my wife." Isabel smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. When her gaze fell on Moon, who was watching everything from the porch in her wheelchair, something dark seemed to pass across her face. "And this must be Moon," she said, approaching the girl. "Your father talks about you a lot." Moon didn't answer. Her small fingers tightened around the stone amulet she always carried with her, a gift from Grandma Martha. That night, as the family dined in a silence loaded with tension, the wind increased outside, beating against the windows as if wanting to come in. In the mountains, dark clouds were forming, and the distant howl of a wolf echoed through the rocky slopes, a sound that hadn't been heard in that region for decades. The storm was just beginning. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. Dawn brought a clear sky after the previous night's storm. Isabel observed the landscape from the guest room window, her calculating eyes absorbing every detail of the property. When Richard hugged her from behind, she turned with a rehearsed smile. "This house is quaint," she commented carefully. "But don't you think we could find something more suitable for our lifestyle?" Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair. "This land has belonged to my family for generations, Isabel. Besides, I want Moon to grow up knowing her roots." The mention of the girl made Isabel's smile falter momentarily. "Of course, darling. I'm just thinking about the future. Our future together." In the yard, Grandpa Anthony was showing Moon how the plants had grown after the rain. The girl, fascinated, touched the wet leaves with her fingertips, feeling the life pulsing in them. "Grandpa, the plants are happy today," she said, smiling. "They're singing." Grandpa Anthony smiled tenderly, Like Grandma Martha, he also perceived his granddaughter's extraordinary sensitivity, her ability to connect with nature in ways many had forgotten. "And what are they singing, my dear?" "They're trying to warn me about something," replied Moon, slightly furrowing her brow. "But I can't understand everything yet." From the porch, Isabel observed the interaction with growing discomfort. She approached them with decisive steps, maintaining an artificial smile on her face. "Good morning. What are you doing up so early?" she asked, her voice too sweet. "We're listening to the plants," Moon answered simply. Isabel laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "What an adorable imagination," she exclaimed, placing her hand on Grandpa Anthony's shoulder. "Don't you think it would be good for her to have contact with children her age, perhaps a special school?" Grandpa Anthony gently removed Isabel's hand. "Moon learns at home. Grandma Martha and I take care of her education. It's always been that way." Isabel's smile hardened, but she maintained her composure. "Of course, I was just thinking about her well-being. It must be difficult for you at your age to care for a child with special needs." Before Grandpa Anthony could respond, Grandma Martha appeared at the kitchen door, drying her hands on her apron. "Breakfast is ready," she announced, her penetrating gaze fixed on Isabel. "And don't worry about us, young lady. We've been taking very good care of Moon for 4 years. During breakfast, Richard tried to ease the tension by talking about his plans. "I've been thinking about reopening the old practice in town. Oakridge has grown while I was away, and they need a resident doctor." "That's great news, son," responded Grandma Martha, serving more coffee. "And what does Isabel do? Is she also in the medical field?" Isabel smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "No, I'm a marketing specialist. I was working in Denver when I met Richard. But I'm considering opening a tourism agency here. This region has enormous potential that no one is properly exploiting." Grandpa Anthony and Grandma Martha exchanged concerned looks. "The mountains have their secrets, Isabel," said Grandpa Anthony calmly. "Not everything here should be exploited." Isabel shrugged. "Ecotourism is sustainable. We could organize trails tours." "Some trails should not be traveled," interrupted Grandma Martha firmly. "There are places in the mountains that are sacred to our people." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Moon, who had been eating quietly until then, suddenly raised her face. "Isabel has a secret," said the girl, her clear voice cutting through the silence. "She didn't come here because of Daddy." All eyes turned to Moon. Isabel visibly paled before forcing a laugh. "What nonsense, dear. Of course I came because of your father. We love each other." Moon continued staring at Isabel with her penetrating eyes. "The mountain told me you're looking for something that's been hidden for a long time." Richard seemed embarrassed. "Moon, don't speak to Isabel like that, apologize." But Isabel had already stood up, her expression a mixture of anger and fear. "Don't worry, Richard. Children say meaningless things." Later, when Richard went out to visit his old practice, Isabel approached Moon, who was playing alone in the garden. She crouched beside the wheelchair, her face now stripped of any false sympathy. "Listen carefully, girl," she whispered, making sure they were alone. "I don't know what kind of game you're trying to play, but it won't work with me. Your father and I have plans, and you won't get in the way." Moon showed no fear, only curiosity. "Why are your eyes so dark inside?" she asked innocently. Isabel recoiled as if she'd been slapped. She quickly stood up and moved away, not noticing that Grandma Martha had witnessed the entire scene from the kitchen window, her heart tight with concern. The sun was beginning to set when Grandma Martha took Moon to the backyard, under the shade of an old apple tree. The stars were already beginning to dot the sky as the grandmother combed her granddaughter's hair. "Grandma," called Moon, her voice as soft as the wind that swayed the leaves above, "tell me again the story of the guardians of the mountains." "Grandma." Martha smiled, her skilled fingers braiding the girl's dark hair. "It's an ancient story that my grandmother told me, and her grandmother told her," she began, her voice taking on the cadenced rhythm of ancient storytellers. "They say that even before the first men arrived in these lands, Oakridge Mountains was already protected by 4 guardians: the silver wolf, the golden eagle, the spotted jaguar, and the white deer. Moon's eyes shone, absorbing every word. They were the protectors of balance, continued Grandma Martha. Each represented a force of nature: earth, water, fire, and air. Together, they maintained the harmony of the valley. But when men arrived with their machines and ambition, the Guardians retreated to the depths of the mountain, awaiting the day when they would be called again. "And how will they be called?" asked Moon, though she already knew the answer. "By someone with a pure heart who knows the ancient song," answered Grandma Martha, finishing the braid. "Someone who can see beyond the eyes and hear beyond the ears." The silence that followed was broken by Isabel, who suddenly appeared in the backyard. "What a folkloric story," she commented with poorly disguised disdain. "Do you really believe that?" Grandma Martha rose slowly, her posture straight despite her advanced age. "Some truths are older than books, young lady. Knowledge doesn't always come from universities." Isabel rolled her eyes, impatient. "Richard asked me to let you know we're invited to dinner at Mayor Thompson's house tonight. Apparently he wants to discuss some development project for the region." Grandma Martha's face stiffened. "Thompson, again with his projects, as what does he want to destroy now?" Isabel suddenly seemed interested. "You know his plans?" "I know the man," responded Grandma Martha firmly. 3 years ago he tried to build a luxury resort in a protected area of the mountains. He was stopped by the community, but he never really gave up." Isabel's eyes shone with an undisguisable emotion. "A resort would be perfect for local tourism," she commented, calculating. "Imagine the potential." "Imagine the destruction," cut Grandma Martha. "Some lands are sacred, girl. They weren't made to be exploited." At Mayor Thompson's house, a colonial mansion in the central square, the tension was palpable. The host, a corpulent man in his 50s, conversed animatedly with Richard and Isabel, while Grandpa Anthony and Grandma Martha remained distant, observing with distrust. Moon had stayed at home under the care of Margaret, an old family friend. "I believe we're on the threshold of a new era for Oakridge," declared Thompson, raising his glass of wine. "With Dr. Richard's support and the innovative ideas of Mrs. Isabel, we can finally realize the resort project." Grandma Martha couldn't contain herself anymore. "And what happened to the environmental prohibition, Thompson?" she questioned, her voice sharp. "The Highlands are still a preservation area." The mayor smiled condescendingly. "We managed a revision of the demarcation," he answered with satisfaction. "The lands of Ancient Stone Valley were released for sustainable development." Grandpa Anthony paled. "Ancient Stone Valley? You can't be serious. That place—" "Here's just a piece of land with some old rocks," interrupted Thompson, impatient. "The legend of the Guardians is just a story for children, Anthony. We need to think about progress." Isabel, who was following the discussion with growing interest, approached. "You mentioned a legend," she asked, feigning casual curiosity. "It sounds fascinating." Thompson laughed, serving himself more wine. "A nonsense about guardian spirits and hidden treasures. They say there's a cave in the valley where the ancients left a sacred artifact that can control the forces of nature. Pure superstition." Isabel's face lit up for an instant, but she quickly disguised it, assuming an expression of amusement. "What charming folklore," she exclaimed. "Perhaps we can incorporate it into the resort's marketing." Grandma Martha observed Isabel attentively, noting the sudden change in her behavior. There was something in the woman's eyes, a spark of ambition that deeply concerned her. During the rest of the evening, Isabel asked seemingly innocent questions about the valley, the local legends, and mainly the exact location of the ancient stones. Her obsessive interest didn't go unnoticed by Grandma Martha and Grandpa Anthony. On the way back home, the elderly couple shared their concerns. "She didn't come here by chance," murmured Grandma Martha. "Isabel is searching for the artifact. Somehow she discovered about the moonstone." Grandpa Anthony nodded gravely. "And if she finds it—" "We cannot allow it," completed Grandma Martha. "The balance of the entire valley depends on it. It's time to prepare Moon. The girl needs to know her true purpose before it's too late." Night advanced, and in the Oliver's house Moon slept restlessly, her dreams populated by silver wolves and whispering mountains trying to transmit an urgent message to her. On her chest, The small stone amulet that Grandma Martha had given her glowed softly, as if responding to a distant call. Morning arrived with a thick fog that enveloped Oakridge Mountains like a cloak. Grandma Martha was in the yard, harvesting herbs for her teas when Isabel appeared, surprising her. "You're up early today," commented the old woman, without diverting her attention from her plants. Isabel smiled, approaching with calculated steps. "I've always liked the dawn," she answered, carefully observing what Grandma Martha was doing. "Are those medicinal herbs?" "Some heal the body, others protect the soul," replied the woman, enigmatically. "Each has its purpose." Isabel picked a sprig of rosemary, twirling it between her fingers. "You know, after hearing so many stories yesterday, I became curious about this valley. I think it would be a great place for an educational trip with Moon. I'd like to get closer to her." Grandma Martha straightened up, staring at Isabel with penetrating eyes. "Ancient Stone Valley is not a place for tourist excursions." "Why not?" insisted Isabel, feigning innocence. "If it's so special, wouldn't it be good for Moon to know it?" Before Grandma Martha could answer, they were interrupted by Richard's arrival. "Good morning," he exclaimed, kissing his mother's forehead and then Isabel's lips. "What were you talking about?" "Your wife wants to take Moon to Ancient Stone Valley," responded Grandma Martha directly. Richard seemed surprised. "Is that true, Isabel?" "I thought it would be good for her to know the places that are part of the family history," explained Isabel softly. "You yourself said you wanted her to connect more with her roots." Richard smiled, visibly touched. "That's very kind of you. I confess I was worried about how you two would get along." Grandma Martha observed the scene with growing distrust, but remained silent. Later, when Richard went out to handle business, in town she sought out Grandpa Anthony in the shed where he worked on his wooden sculptures. "She's plotting something, Anthony," she said, closing the door behind her. "Isabel wants to take Moon to the valley." Grandpa Anthony put down his carving knife, his expression grave. "We need to tell Richard the truth before it's too late." Grandma Martha shook her head. "He wouldn't believe it. He's completely blinded by her." She paused, taking a deep breath. "It's time to show Moon the path to the cave. She needs to know her destiny." On the other side of the property, Moon was playing in the garden when Isabel approached, holding an old book. "Look what I found in the town library," she said, showing a worn tome about Colorado legends. "It has stories about this ancient Stone Valley. I thought we could read together." Moon hesitated, but her natural curiosity spoke louder. Isabel sat down next to her and opened the book to a specific chapter. "It says here that the ancient guardians of the mountain hid a treasure in a secret cave," read Isabel, carefully observing the girl's reactions. "A magical stone that shines like the moon. Have you heard this story?" Moon's eyes shone with recognition. "The Moonstone," she murmured almost involuntarily. Isabel controlled her excitement, keeping her voice casual. "You know it? How interesting. The book says that only someone pure of heart can find it. Maybe we too could look for it someday, as a special adventure. It would be our little secret." At that moment, Grandma Martha appeared, her countenance serious. "Moon, dear, it's time for your rest," she said firmly. "Isabel, may I speak with you in the kitchen?" Reluctantly, Isabel closed the book and followed the old woman into the house. In the kitchen, Grandma Martha dismissed the maid and closed the door. "I'll be direct," she began, her eyes fixed on Isabel's. "I know what you're looking for, and I warn you, the Moonstone is not what you imagine." Isabel paled momentarily before regaining her composure. "I don't know what you're talking about. I was just—" "Spare us this theater," interrupted Grandma Martha. "Richard may not see, but I recognize greed when I see it. That artifact doesn't bring riches. It brings responsibilities, and for someone with impure intentions, it brings destruction." Isabel abandoned the facade, her face hardening. "Do you know what they say about this stone in certain circles, old woman? That it contains enough power to control the elements. Imagine what someone could do with that." "Exactly what I fear," responded Grandma Martha. "You're not the first to try to find it out of greed, and I doubt you'll be the last. But know that the mountains protect their secrets." Isabel laughed, a cold and cutting sound. Protection? A handful of legends and an elderly couple. Richard is with me now, and soon Moon will be too. She's the key, isn't she? The girl has some connection to the artifact. Grandma Martha felt a chill run down her spine, but remained firm. Underestimate Oakridge Mountains at your own risk, Isabel. Forces older than any of us still watch over this place. Later that day, when the house finally grew quiet, Grandma Martha took Moon to a small altar, hidden in a room at the back of the house. She lit beeswax candles and placed her granddaughter in the center of a circle drawn on the wooden floor. Moon, my dear, the time has come for you to know the truth about who you are and why you're here, said Grandma Martha, holding the girl's hands. Your mother didn't leave this world by accident. She was the previous guardian, and with her last breath she passed the legacy to you. Moon's eyes widened. Mommy knew the guardians? She asked, her voice barely containing the emotion. She was more than that, my dear. Claire was the priestess of the mountain, the protector of the balance, explained Grandma Martha, removing the small amulet from her granddaughter's neck. And this is not just a stone. It's a fragment of the true moonstone, so that you would never lose sight of your destiny. The amulet glowed softly in the candlelight, emanating an ancient energy that made the air around vibrate. Outside the house, the wind increased, as if the mountains themselves were reacting to the revelation. In her room, Isabel felt the change in the atmosphere and smiled to herself. The plan was in motion. The weather in Oakridge had changed drastically in recent days. Dark clouds hung over the mountain, and the wind howled down the slopes like a wounded animal. In town, the older residents exchanged worried glances. They knew those signs, omens that something in the natural balance had been disturbed. In the Olivers' house, the tension was equally palpable. Richard, oblivious to the true reasons for the weather changes, attributed everything to seasonal variations. This weather is hindering my plans, he commented during lunch. Thompson wants us to visit the valley today to mark the terrain for the future resort. Grandma Martha dropped her fork, the metallic sound reverberating in the sudden silence. You can't enter the valley in this weather, she warned, her voice loaded with urgency. The mountain is agitated. Isabel smiled condescendingly. The mountain is agitated. Please, it's just normal weather conditions. Moon, who had been eating quietly until then, raised her eyes. Grandma is right, she said simply. The guardians are restless. Richard sighed, visibly annoyed. Moon, dear, don't start with these stories. They're just legends. Not everything we don't understand is superstition, Richard, intervened Grandpa Anthony, his tone more serious than usual. This region has its peculiarities. Isabel stood up abruptly, an idea forming in her calculating mind. I have a proposal, she announced, surprising everyone. Why don't we take Moon with us? It would be a great opportunity for her to know the region. The suggestion provoked immediate reactions. Grandma Martha paled, Grandpa Anthony frowned, and Richard looked confused. I don't think that's a good idea, he objected. The terrain is rough, difficult even for those without mobility limitations. Isabel approached Moon, her eyes shining with false kindness. But it would be so special for her. We could adapt the trip. Grandma Martha stood up, confronting. Isabel, my granddaughter isn't going anywhere with you, she declared, her voice as firm as the rocks of the mountain. Not without me. The last phrase surprised everyone, especially Isabel, who hadn't expected this move. You want to come with us? She asked, barely managing to hide her discontent. If Moon goes, I go too, responded Grandma Martha, unyielding. I know every trail on that mountain, every stone, every curve. Richard, seeing his mother's determination, nodded. That's fair. Mum knows the region better than any of us. Isabel bit her lip, her mind working quickly to adapt her plans. Of course, it will be educational to have you with us, she finally agreed, forcing a smile. Later, as they prepared for the outing, Grandpa Anthony took Richard by the arm, moving him away from the women. Son, be careful, he warned, his voice low and grave. There's something in this whole story that doesn't smell right to me. What do you mean, Dad? Asked Richard, confused. Grandpa Anthony hesitated, unsure about how much he could reveal without seeming like a superstitious old man. Just observe Isabel carefully, her intentions with Moon and with the valley. Richard frowned, a flash of irritation crossing his face. Dad, Isabel is just trying to get close to Moon. It's natural that she wants to build a relationship with her. Is it? Questioned Grandpa Anthony. Then why the sudden interest in ancient Stone Valley? Why the insistence on taking Moon? Richard had no answer for that, but before he could reflect more, Isabel approached, already dressed for the hike. Are we ready? She asked, radiant. Moon is so excited. In Thompson's jeep, the group followed the winding road that led to the higher parts of the mountain. The mayor drove with Richard beside him. In the back seat, Isabel sat between Grandma Martha and Moon, an arrangement that visibly bothered her. This whole area will be transformed, commented Thompson, gesturing broadly. Imagine, luxury chalets, a spa, gourmet restaurants, Oakridge will be on the international tourism map. Grandma Martha observed the landscape with sad eyes, seeing beyond the trees and rocks, feeling the ancestral energy that permeated that place. Human greed has no limits, she murmured, more to herself than to others. As they climbed, the weather worsened. The fog grew denser, and the wind increased its intensity, whipping the trees with growing fury. Maybe we should go back, suggested Richard, concerned. This weather doesn't seem safe. Nonsense, retorted Thompson. It's just a bit of wind. Besides, we're almost there. When the jeep finally stopped in a natural clearing, the fog was so thick they could barely see a few meters ahead. Welcome to the future Golden Ridge Resort, announced Thompson with a theatrical flourish, opening his arms. Isabel immediately exited the vehicle, her eyes scanning the environment with barely disguised avidity. She wasn't interested in the resort, but in what was hidden beyond the clearing. Grandma Martha helped Moon descend, supporting her in her special chair for rough terrain. Do you feel that, Grandma? Whispered the girl, firmly holding the amulet on her neck. The mountain is singing. The old woman nodded, also perceiving the subtle vibration in the air, an ancient call that few could hear. It always sings for those who know how to listen. My little one. Isabel approached the two, interrupting the moment. Moon, dear, would you like to see an incredible view? She asked sweetly. There's a lookout just ahead. Grandma Martha interposed herself between them. I think we should. All stay together, she said firmly. The fog is too dense for us to separate. The silent confrontation between the two women was interrupted by a thunderous sound coming from the mountain. A tremor shook the ground, making everyone lose their balance. What was that? Exclaimed Richard, alarmed. Just a small rockfall, responded Thompson, although his voice betrayed nervousness. It happens all the time this time of year. But it wasn't a simple rockfall. It was a warning from the mountain, a manifestation of its growing agitation. And at the center of that silent whirlwind of ancient energy, Moon closed her eyes, her small body trembling slightly as she absorbed the signals that only she could fully interpret. The storm was about to break, both in the sky and in the hearts of those who ventured into the domain of the Guardians. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. The fog enveloped the group like a ghostly cloak, isolating them from the rest of the world. Thompson nervously consulted his map and GPS, visibly disturbed by not being able to properly orient himself. We should have brought a local guide, he muttered, frustrated. Grandma Martha observed everything with attentive eyes, noticing every movement of Isabel, who kept circling the perimeter of the clearing, as if looking for something. The trail to the lookout must be over there, pointed Isabel, indicating a narrow passage between two imposing rock formations. Richard approached Moon, who remained strangely calm amid the growing tension. Are you okay, my little one? Aren't you scared? He asked, genuinely concerned. Moon smiled, her eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond her years. The mountain won't hurt me, Daddy. It knows me. Richard frowned, disconcerted by the enigmatic response. Before he could question more, Thompson approached, clapping his hands to get everyone's attention. Let's split up to cover more ground, he proposed. Richard and I will check the west side for the main foundations of the resort. Isabel can see. Take Moon and Grandma Martha to see the lookout. We'll meet back here in an hour. Isabel couldn't hide her smile. It was exactly what she wanted. Excellent idea, she quickly agreed. Shall we, Moon? It will be fun. Grandma Martha immediately perceived the trap. I prefer that we all stay together, she insisted. This place can be treacherous for those who don't know it well. Thompson laughed, dismissing the concern. Grandma Martha, with all due respect, but we've been here several times for preliminary studies. It's perfectly safe. For you, perhaps, responded the old woman, her eyes fixed on Isabel. But there are places in the mountains that don't welcome certain types of visitors. Isabel held the gaze, a silent challenge hanging between them. Richard, misinterpreting the tension, intervened. Mom, please, Isabel just wants to show the place to Moon. What harm could there be in that? More than you imagine, murmured Grandma Martha, but realizing she was in the minority, reluctantly yielded. All right, but let's all go to the lookout first. Then you can head to the west side. Thompson opened his mouth to protest, but Isabel interrupted him. That seems fair to me. Let's all go to the lookout and then separate. As they walked along the narrow trail, the wind increased, bringing with it a different aroma, a mixture of wet earth and something older, primordial. Moon breathed deeply, as if recognizing that scent. We're close, she whispered. Isabel, pushing Moon's special chair, leaned down to ask, Close to what, dear? To the sacred place, the girl answered simply. Isabel's eyes shone with barely contained ambition. Grandma. Martha, who was walking just behind, noticed the change in the woman's expression and quickened her pace to stay closer to her granddaughter. When they reached the lookout, even Thompson and Richard fell silent, impressed by the spectacular view that unfolded. Despite the fog, they could see the valley below, the ancient rock formations, and the river that meandered like a silver ribbon. It's breathtaking, commented Richard in awe. Thompson was already calculating the profits. Imagine a panoramic restaurant here. Tourists would pay fortunes for this view. Grandma Martha closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the energy of the place, the ancestral connection with the earth. When she opened them again, she saw that Isabel had moved away with Moon, taking her to a peculiar rock formation on the opposite side of the lookout. What are you doing? She called, alarmed. Isabel turned with a rehearsed smile. Moon wanted to see these rocks up close. They seem to form a kind of natural altar, don't you think? Grandma Martha paled. That was, in fact, one of the sacred altars of the ancient guardians, a point of connection between the material world and the spiritual. That Isabel had found it so easily was no coincidence. Get away from there, she ordered, her voice firmer than ever. That place is not to be disturbed. Richard, irritated by his mother's insistence, intervened. Mum, enough of these superstitions. They're just rocks. Your son is right, Grandma Martha, added Thompson condescendingly. We need to overcome these primitive beliefs if we want Oakridge to progress. A sudden thunder split the sky, followed by lightning that illuminated the entire valley. The storm, which had been threatening for hours, finally broke. The rain began to fall violently, turning the trail into slippery mud in seconds. We need to get out of here, shouted Richard, trying to make himself heard above the noise. Thompson agreed, already running back to the main trail. Let's get to the jeep. Hurry! Grandma Martha searched for Moon with her eyes, only to discover that Isabel was already pushing the girl's chair along a different path, quickly moving away from the group. Isabel! She called, desperate. Where do you think you're going? Richard also noticed the movement. Isabel, come back, it's dangerous. But Isabel was already too far away to hear, or pretended not to hear. With surprising dexterity for someone unfamiliar with the terrain, she pushed the wheelchair along an almost invisible trail that descended toward the heart of the valley. Quick, Moon, she whispered, her face transformed by greed. You're going to show me where the cave is, where the moonstone is. Moon, despite her growing fear, remained strangely calm. Why do you want to find it? She asked, her voice almost inaudible under the roar of the storm. Isabel laughed, a cold sound that was lost in the wind. Power, child. They say whoever possesses the Moonstone will control the elements and the forces of nature. Imagine what I could do with that. Moon touched the small amulet on her neck, feeling it pulse against her skin. The stone doesn't work like that, she tried to explain. It doesn't give power. It restores balance. That's what they tell fools to keep them away, retorted Isabel, without slowing her pace. Your mother knew the truth. That's why she died, isn't it? She found the stone. Moon's heart tightened at the mention of her mother. Mommy was the guardian, she said simply. She protected the stone. Isabel stopped abruptly, turning the chair to face Moon. Then you know where it is, she exclaimed, triumphant. Take me there now. In the clearing above, Richard, Grandma Martha, and Thompson frantically searched for Isabel and Moon. She must have slipped somewhere, shouted Richard, desperate. Grandma Martha knew better. With a determination born of love and duty, she moved away from the men and closed her eyes, letting her ancestral connection with the mountain guide her. When she opened them again, she knew exactly where Isabel had taken her granddaughter. "The Whisper Cave," she murmured, her heart tight with fear. "The main sanctuary." Without a word to the others, she began to descend the slippery slope, following the steps of Isabel and Moon. The betrayal had been consummated, and now only the ancient guardians could protect the little priestess from the evil that threatened her. Tentar novamente es continuar editar continuando traducción, siguiendo con la historia de Isabel I need to continue the English translation of this story, maintaining the Americanized names and settings while preserving the original narrative structure and themes. Let me pick up where I left off. In the last part, Isabel had taken Moon toward the Whisper Cave, while Grandma Martha followed them, recognizing the danger. Richard and Mayor Thompson were still searching for them in the clearing above. I'll continue with Isabel and Moon's journey into the cave and Grandma Martha's pursuit. The rain mercilessly lashed Oak Ridge Mountains, transforming trails into torrents and soaking the soil. Isabel, determined and blinded by ambition, continued, pushing Moon's chair along increasingly dangerous paths, descending toward the heart of the valley. "We're lost," said Moon, trying to make Isabel reconsider. "Nobody can find the cave in this weather." "Don't underestimate me, girl," replied Isabel, a feverish gleam in her eyes. "I've researched for years. I looked in ancient books, scrolls, studied maps. I know that Whisper Cave is near the stream, with the red stones." Moon felt a chill down her spine. Isabel knew more than she should. "How did you discover all this?" she asked, genuinely curious. Isabel smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Your mother wasn't the first guardian I met," she revealed. "There was another years ago, in a village in northern Colorado, an old woman who kept the secrets of another sacred place." Something in the way Isabel said it made Moon shudder. "What happened to her?" Isabel shrugged, indifferent. "Tragic fates happen, especially when people refuse to share valuable knowledge." Her terrible understanding took hold of Moon. Isabel wasn't just ambitious, she was dangerous. "It was you, wasn't it?" whispered the girl. "It was you who made my mother leave this world." For a moment, Isabel's face hardened, revealing the cruelty behind the mask. "Your mother was foolish, just like your grandmother. She believed that the stone's power should remain hidden, used only to balance nature," she said with disdain. "Imagine what we could do with that power. Control the weather, manipulate elements, bend the very earth to our will." "The stone doesn't work like that," insisted Moon. "It wasn't made to control but to harmonize." Isabel laughed, pushing the chair with more force. "That's what they tell children, but the ancient texts I found tell a different story." The Moonstone was created by the ancients to dominate the forces of nature. The trail was becoming increasingly steep, and the chair began to slip in the mud. Moon held on tightly, fearing she might fall at any moment. "I can't push this thing anymore," declared Isabel, stopping abruptly. "I'll have to carry you." Without waiting for a response, she picked Moon up in her arms. The girl was light, but Isabel clearly wasn't used to carrying weights. They advanced with difficulty down the slippery slope, until they reached a rock formation that looked like a natural arch. "There!" exclaimed Isabel, triumphant. "The entrance to the cave!" It was a discreet opening in the rock, almost hidden by dense vegetation. If you didn't know what to look for, anyone would pass right by without noticing it. As they approached the entrance, Moon felt the amulet on her neck grow warmer, pulsing against her skin like a small heart. Meanwhile, higher up the mountain, Grandma Martha descended with difficulty along the same trail, guided by a deeper knowledge than any map. The rain punished her elderly body, but her determination didn't waver. Richard and Thompson had headed toward the jeep, believing that Isabel and Moon might have sought shelter there. Only Grandma Martha knew where Isabel was really going. "Hold tight, my little one," she murmured to the wind, as if her words could reach her granddaughter. "The guardians are with you." At the entrance to the cave, Isabel placed Moon on the ground, leaning her against a rock. "Now tell me," she demanded, her voice hard, "where exactly in the cave is the stone?" Moon looked into the dark interior of the grotto, feeling an ancient and powerful presence waiting inside. "I can't simply show you," she responded calmly. "The stone reveals itself only to those it chooses." Isabel lost patience, grabbing Moon by the shoulders. "No more games. Take me to the stone now, or what?" The girl's voice sounded surprisingly firm. "Will you abandon me here? Hurt? Me? The guardians are watching, Isabel. They always have been." As if in response to Moon's words, a long, melancholy howl echoed through the valley, cutting through the noise of the storm. Isabel froze, looking nervously around. What trick is this? There haven't been wolves in this region for decades. "The guardians aren't ordinary animals," explained Moon, a strange gleam in her eyes. "They're ancient spirits that take physical form when necessary." The howl sounded again, closer this time. Isabel roughly pulled Moon, dragging her into the cave. "Enough stories, let's finish this quickly." The interior of the cave was surprisingly dry and warmer than outside. The walls were covered with ancient symbols, painted with natural pigments that still maintained their vivid colors after centuries. Small crystals embedded in the rock emitted a soft glow, illuminating the path without need for flashlights. Isabel looked at everything with amazement and covetousness. "It's real, it's all real." Moon touched the walls with reverence, recognizing the symbols of the four guardians: the silver wolf, the golden eagle, the spotted jaguar, and the white deer. "My mother used to bring me here when I was a baby," she revealed, the memory returning like flashes of light. "She would show me the symbols and sing the ancient song." Isabel, momentarily distracted by the beauty of the place, turned her attention back to Moon. "What song? Is it some kind of password?" Moon shook her head. "It's more than that. It's a summons." Before Isabel could question further, the cave floor began to tremble slightly. It wasn't an earthquake, but a rhythmic vibration, like the footsteps of something large approaching the entrance. Fear finally hit Isabel when a low growl echoed through the cave. Standing at the entrance, blocking the exit, was a wolf with fur as silver as the full moon. Its eyes, a deep and brilliant blue, fixed on Isabel with clearly supernatural intelligence. "Impossible," she stammered, backing away. Moon smiled, extending her hand toward the animal. "The Silver Guardian," she said softly. "You came." The wolf slowly advanced into the cave, its body emanating a soft light that further illuminated the environment. It was larger than any natural wolf, the size of a small horse, and each step it took seemed deliberate, conscious. Isabel, in panic, pulled Moon in front of her body, using her as a shield. "Stay back," she shouted at the wolf. "Oh, or the girl gets hurt." Moon's calm expression didn't change. "He's not here to hurt me, Isabel. He's here to protect me, to protect the balance." Outside the cave, Grandma Martha finally reached the entrance, arriving in time to see the magnificent silver wolf. Tears of emotion ran down her wrinkled face. "He's returned," she whispered, amazed. "After so many years, the Guardian has awakened." Inside the cave, the impasse continued. Isabel, still holding Moon, retreated deeper into the interior, while the wolf advanced slowly, unhurried. Its penetrating blue eyes seemed to see beyond physical appearance, directly into Isabel's blackened soul. "What does it want?" she screamed, desperate. Justice, answered Moon simply, touching the amulet on her neck. And balance. The amulet began to glow intensely, responding to the Guardian's presence. A bluish light emanated from it, connecting with the silver wolf's eyes in a visible bond of ancient energy. At that moment, Isabel understood her fatal mistake. It wasn't the cave that guarded the moonstone. The fragment of the sacred artifact had been hanging around Moon's neck all along. Time seemed suspended. Inside the cave, the bluish light emanating from Moon's amulet bathed the ancient walls, making the symbols etched in the stone seem to dance and come alive. The silver wolf remained motionless, its eyes fixed on Isabel, who held Moon as an improvised shield. Back. Off, Isabel ordered the animal, her trembling voice betraying her fear. I know you can understand me. The wolf didn't move, but a new sound echoed through the cave, hesitant, dragging footsteps. Grandma Martha appeared at the entrance, soaked and exhausted, but with determination shining in her eyes. Let go of my granddaughter, she demanded, slowly advancing. Isabel laughed, a high-pitched, desperate sound. Or what, old woman? You'll attack me with your herbs? But there was something different about Grandma Martha now. An ancient dignity, an authority that came not just from her age, but from a deep connection with the place and its guardians. She moved to the wolf's side, who slightly inclined its head in a sign of respect. You don't understand what you've awakened, Isabel, said Grandma Martha, her voice calm but firm. The stone isn't just an object of power, it's part of an ancient balance. Lies, shouted Isabel. You want the power just for yourselves. It's always been that way with the old families of this place. Moon, still in Isabel's arms, touched the glowing amulet on her neck. It's not power, Isabel, she explained, gently. It's responsibility. The stone chooses its guardians, not the other way around. A new tremor shook the cave, stronger than the previous one. Small stones began to fall from the ceiling. The mountain's balance was rapidly unraveling. What's happening? Asked Isabel, nervously looking up. The mountains respond to the disturbance. Of balance, explained Grandma Martha. You brought greed and violence to a sacred place. The mountain reacts. At that moment, concerned voices echoed from outside. Richard and Thompson had followed the footprints left in the mud. Mom, called Richard, entering the cave. Isabel, Moon, are you... His words died when he saw the scene, his daughter in his wife's arms like a hostage, his mother beside a gigantic silver wolf, and the strange blue glow that enveloped everything. What's going on here? He stammered, unable to process what he was seeing. Thompson entered right behind him, turning pale at the sight of the wolf. My God, is this real? He murmured, his usual cynicism replaced by genuine fear. Isabel saw in Richard her last chance. Richard, thank God you're here, she exclaimed, her voice transforming into a desperate plea. Your mother and this animal are trying to hurt us. Help us. But Richard, despite his initial disbelief in legends and superstitions, could now clearly see who the real threat was. His daughter's eyes, calm and wise, contrasted with the uncontrolled panic in Isabel's. Let go of my daughter, he said, stepping forward. Now, Isabel. Isabel's mask fell completely, her face contorted into an expression of anger and frustration. You, too, she hissed. After everything I did to find you, to get close to you and this damn stone. The truth hit Richard like lightning. You never loved me, he asked, the pain evident in his voice. It was all a lie? Isabel laughed, a harsh sound with no humor. Love? That was just a means to an end. When I learned that the previous guardian's son had left Oakridge, I saw my chance. It was so easy to find you in Denver, console you, make you believe fate had brought us together. Moon looked at her father with compassion. Daddy, she wants the amulet. She thinks it will give her power. Richard, still processing the betrayal, remained silent for a few moments. Then something awakened in him, a memory perhaps, or an ancestral connection he had ignored for too long. Claire tried to tell me, he murmured, tears in his eyes. Before she left, she tried to explain about the family legacy, about the stone, the guardians. I wouldn't listen. I thought they were delusions. Grandma Martha approached her son. It's never too late to honor the truth, Richard. You are part of this land as much as any of us. A new tremor, more violent than the previous ones, shook the cave. This time, a large crack appeared in the ceiling, and the light from the storm infiltrated through the opening. Thompson, who had remained silent until then, reacted pragmatically. We need to get out of here. The cave is going to collapse. But Isabel, instead of seeking safety, seemed seized by a feverish determination. Not without the stone, she declared, violently tearing the amulet from Moon's neck with a jerk. What happened next surprised everyone. The moment Isabel touched the amulet, a discharge of blue energy traveled through her body. She screamed, not in pain, but in triumph, believing the power was finally in her hands. But the glow rapidly increased, becoming almost blinding. Isabel tried to drop the amulet, but it seemed stuck to her skin, burning like blue fire. What's happening? She screamed in panic. Make it stop. Moon, now free, dragged herself to her father and grandmother. The stone is defending itself, she explained calmly. It rejects those who try to use it out of greed. The silver wolf slowly advanced toward Isabel, its blue eyes shining with the same intensity as the amulet. The cave walls began to reveal new symbols, previously hidden, ancient drawings showing people being consumed by blue light, punished for profaning the sacred artifacts. Richard picked up Moon in his arms, protecting her. We need to leave, he insisted. Now. Grandma Martha nodded. Come, Thompson, there's nothing more we can do here. The mayor, pale and trembling, seemed hypnotized by the spectacle of Isabel struggling against the energy consuming her. But she's going to, he began, unable to complete the phrase. The mountain will decide her fate now, responded Grandma Martha firmly, just as it decides the fate of all who challenge it. As the group retreated from the cave, followed by the silver wolf, Isabel's screams transformed into desperate sobs. The last sight they had of her was of a woman on her knees, enveloped in blue light, imploring forces she neither understood nor respected. Outside, the storm had magically ceased. The sky was clear, revealing a spectacle of stars that seemed to shine with supernatural intensity. The air was charged with electricity, and fragrances from the forest renewed by the rain. How will we get back? Asked Thompson, looking uncertainly at the muddy trail. As if answering the question, the silver wolf positioned itself in front of the group, clearly indicating it would guide them. Richard looked at his daughter in his arms, then at his mother, and finally at the majestic animal. I'm sorry, he said, his voice choked, for all these years of doubt, for not believing, for abandoning you when... Claire, Grandma Martha placed a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. What matters is that you're here now, and Moon needs her father for the journey ahead. What journey? He asked, confused. Moon smiled, her eyes reflecting the wisdom of the ancients. The journey to restore balance, Daddy. The mountains need all their guardians again. As they followed the silver wolf along the trail illuminated by moonlight, Richard realized that his life had changed forever. The legends he had dismissed as superstitions were real, and his own daughter was at the center of them. A new chapter was beginning, not just for him, but for all of Oakridge. Behind them, the mountain trembled one last time, and the entrance to the cave disappeared under a landslide, sealing, at least for now, the secrets it guarded. Morning came to Oakridge with a splendor rarely seen. The rising sun tinged the sky with shades of pink and gold, while the mist, hovering over the valley, created an almost mystical scene. In the Oliver's house, the silence of dawn had given way to contained bustle. Richard, sitting on the porch with an untouched cup of coffee, observed the horizon with different eyes now. In his lap, an old leather book lay open, Claire's diary, his deceased wife's journal, which Grandma Martha had finally given him upon their return from the mountain. So many secrets, he murmured to himself, turning another yellowed page, covered by Claire's elegant handwriting. So many truths I refuse to see. Inside the house, Moon played quietly in her room, conversing in a low voice with her amulet, which had mysteriously returned to her neck during the night. The silver wolf had disappeared when they arrived home, dissolving into the mist as if it had never materially existed. Thompson had taken refuge in his mansion, refusing to speak to anyone about the events in the cave. After what he had witnessed, his plans for the resort had been completely abandoned. Grandpa Anthony joined Richard on the porch, bringing 2 steaming cups of fresh coffee. "The coffee got cold," he commented, exchanging Richard's cold cup for a hot one. "How's the reading?" Richard sighed deeply. "Revealing, painful. Claire she always knew something like this would happen. It says here she had visions of a green-eyed woman who would come to disturb the balance." Grandpa Anthony nodded gravely. "Your wife had the gift of vision, just as your daughter has now, and as Grandma Martha had in her youth. It's a legacy that passes through the women of the family." "Why didn't you ever tell me?" asked Richard, a touch of hurt in his voice. "Why did Claire keep this secret?" "She tried," answered his father gently. "But you were so determined to live in the rational world, to reject everything that couldn't be explained by science. Claire feared you would try to keep Moon from her destiny." The truth of these words hit Richard like a physical blow. He lowered his head, ashamed. "And she was right, that's exactly what I would have done." Grandpa Anthony placed a comforting hand on his son's shoulder. "What matters is that you understand now, and Moon will need her father's support in the years to come." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Grandma Martha, who brought Moon by the hand. The girl seemed different this morning. There was a new serenity in her childish face, an understanding that went beyond her few years. "Daddy," she called, her voice clear as a bell, "we need to go to the mountain today. All of us." Richard looked questioningly at his mother, who nodded in confirmation. "What for, my little one?" he asked his daughter. "To awaken the other guardians," she answered simply. "The silver wolf was just the first. The golden eagle, the spotted jaguar, and the white deer still sleep. The balance needs to be fully restored." Richard closed Claire's diary, a new determination in his countenance. "Then we'll go, but first I want to know everything, no more secrets between us." Grandma Martha smiled, visibly relieved. "It is time, yes. But first we have a visitor." As if in response to her words, the sound of an approaching car reached them. Down the dirt road an old Jeep approached, raising dust. At the wheel was a middle-aged man with Native American features and graying hair. "Joe," identified Grandpa. Anthony, surprised. "What's he doing here?" "I called him," answered Grandma Martha. "If we're going to restore the balance, we'll need all the help we can get." The vehicle stopped, and the man got out with agile movements despite his advanced age, his eyes penetrating and dark, immediately fixed on Moon. "So it's true," he said, approaching. "The new guardian has awakened the first protector." Moon smiled, as if recognizing an old friend. "Joe Thundercloud," she greeted with respect, "the guardian of knowledge." The man smiled, genuinely surprised. "You know me, little one?" "Not personally," replied Moon, "but the silver wolf showed me. You're the last of the ancient shamans in this region, the one who kept the secrets when all the others left." Richard observed the interaction with fascination. It was as if his daughter were 2 people, the 4-year-old child and an ancient sage, both inhabiting the same body. Joe turned to Richard, extending a calloused hand. "You must be Martha's son. Finally decided to accept your role in this story?" Richard accepted the handshake, feeling a strange energy in the contact. "I'm trying to understand exactly what that role is." The shaman smiled, understanding. "The path reveals itself as we walk, not before. Shall we? The mountain awaits us." As the group prepared for the journey, another scene unfolded in town. Residents reported strange sightings on the slopes of the mountains, a large golden eagle that no one had seen before, giant feline footprints near the river, and tracks of an albino deer in the dense forest. The town elders exchanged meaningful glances. The legends they told their grandchildren were coming to life before their eyes. In Whisper Cave, now sealed by the landslide, something extraordinary was happening. The place where Isabel had last been seen glowed intensely, a bluish light pulsing like a heart. The energy of the moonstone, rejecting greed, had initiated a transformation. Isabel, or what remained of her, was being reconfigured by the primordial force of the mountain. Her body, once human, was now slowly integrating with the very rock of the cave, becoming part of its living system. Her thoughts, once dominated by ambition, now expanded to understand the balance she had so desperately tried to corrupt. It wasn't punishment, but transformation. The mountain didn't destroy. It reintegrated, recycled, renewed. On the trail, leading to the top of the mountain, Richard carried Moon on his back. With each step he took, he felt more connected to the earth beneath his feet, as if ancestral memories stored in his DNA were slowly awakening. "What happened to Isabel?" he finally asked, giving voice to the question no one had asked until then. Joe, who led the group along with Grandma Martha, answered without turning. "She became part of the mountain, neither alive nor dead as we understand those terms. Transformed." "Did she suffer?" insisted Richard, conflicted about how he should feel about the woman who had deceived him. "Transformation is rarely painless," said the shaman, "but pain has purpose. Isabel will learn over the centuries the true meaning of the power she sought." Moon, from the height of her 4 years, added with wisdom, "She's learning to hear the mountain's song, Daddy. One day, perhaps, she too can sing it." The group continued their climb, each step taking them closer to the destiny that awaited them at the top of Oak Ridge Mountains. The rebirth wasn't just for Isabel, but for all of them. For Richard, who was rediscovering his roots. For Moon, who was embracing her destiny. For the mountain itself, awakening from a long sleep to a new era of balance and protection. The journey had only begun, but something fundamental had changed. The first guardian had returned, and the others would soon follow. The ancient song was being intoned again, and its echoes would resonate for generations. The golden light of dusk bathed the top of Oak Ridge Mountains, transforming the rock formations into sculptures of liquid fire. After hours of walking, the small group had finally reached the highest peak in the region, a circular plateau surrounded by 4 gigantic stones that pointed to the cardinal directions. Joe identified the location with reverence. The Circle of Guardians. A ritual hasn't been performed here for at least 3 generations. Moon, whom Richard had placed in the center of the circle, touched the ground with her small hands. Her eyes closed for a moment, and a slight smile formed on her lips. "The Earth is happy we're here," she said, looking at her grandfather. "She missed us." Grandpa Anthony, always the most skeptical in the family, now found himself completely surrendered to the magic of the moment. The experiences of the last few days had dissolved his last doubts. Grandma Martha removed a small package of red fabric from her hand-woven bag. Upon opening it, she revealed 4 stones, 1 silver, 1 golden, 1 black with yellow spots, and 1 crystalline white. "The symbols of the 4 guardians," she explained, placing them at specific points in the circle. A fragment of each, of the sacred artifacts that, together, form the core of the moonstone. Richard observed everything with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. "And what happens now?" he asked, feeling simultaneously an essential part and completely alien to the ritual. Joe smiled, understanding. "Now your daughter does what only she can do. Sing the song that will awaken the remaining guardians." Moon, as if she had rehearsed for this moment her whole life, closed her eyes again. Her small chest expanded with a deep breath, and then her voice, surprisingly mature and strong for such a young child, rose into the mountain air. The melody was strange and ancient, notes that seemed to come not just from her throat, but from her very soul. The words were in a language Richard didn't recognize, probably an ancient Native American dialect from the region. As she sang, the air around the circle began to visibly vibrate, like heat waves over hot asphalt. The 4 stones arranged by Grandma Martha began to glow, first softly, then with increasing intensity. "It's working," whispered Grandma Martha, tears running down her wrinkled face. "After so many years, it's really working." The amulet, On Moon's chest was also glowing now, pulsing in synchrony with the 4 stones. The song reached its peak, the girl's voice echoing down the slopes of the mountain, as if the mountain itself was amplifying the sound. Then they came. First, the silver wolf, already known, emerged from the forest below, climbing the slope with majestic steps. Its blue eyes shone with the same supernatural light as the amulet. Next, the beating of giant wings was heard. Circling the peak, a golden eagle of impossible proportions glided gracefully, its feathers reflecting the light of the setting sun like polished metal. It landed on the eastern stone of the circle, its talons leaving deep marks in the rock. From the south, a roar reverberated through the valley. A spotted jaguar as large as a horse with black fur and golden spots emerged from the dense vegetation. Its movements were fluid like water, and its amber eyes fixed on the circle as it approached. Finally, from the north, a white deer with crystalline antlers advanced with silent steps. Its coat was so white it seemed to emit its own light, and each step it took made small flowers sprout from the ground. The 4 guardians positioned themselves at the cardinal points of the circle, each aligned with one of the glowing stones. Moon continued singing, her voice now interwoven with other sounds, the wolf's howl, the eagle's cry, the jaguar's roar, and a melodious, vibrant sound emanating from the deer. Richard, Grandma Martha, Grandpa Anthony, and Joe observed in reverent silence. They were witnessing something no human had seen in generations, the complete reunion of the ancestral guardians of Oakridge Mountains. When the song finally came to an end, Moon opened her eyes. There was no fatigue on her face, only serene joy. The guardians remained motionless like living statues sculpted by nature. "It is done," announced Joe, his voice barely more than a whisper. "The circle is complete again." Moon extended her hands, and to everyone's amazement, the 4 animals approached simultaneously, touching her small body with muzzle, beak, nose, and forehead respectively. An intense light emanated from these points of contact, completely enveloping the girl for a few seconds. When the light dissipated, the guardians had retreated, and Moon smiled radiantly. "They spoke to me," she said, amazed. "They told me so. Many things." "What did they say, my little one?" asked Grandma Martha, approaching to embrace her granddaughter. "They said they'll stay now, that they won't leave again." "The mountain is protected and they'll help it heal," replied Moon, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "And they also showed me what happened to Isabel." Richard tensed, uncertain if he wanted to hear. "What did they see?" he asked, despite his apprehension. "She's not gone, Daddy," explained Moon with surprising gentleness. "She transformed. The stone doesn't destroy, it transforms. Isabel is becoming part of the mountain itself now. One day, when she has learned the true meaning of balance, she may help protect what she once wanted to exploit." Richard felt a weight lift from his shoulders. There was no denying Isabel's betrayal, the harm she had tried to do, but knowing that even she had a chance at redemption brought him unexpected peace. "And now?" he asked, looking at the horizon where the sun was beginning to disappear. "What happens next?" Joe smiled, following Richard's gaze. "Now, the real work begins. The mountain is protected by the guardians, but the world out there continues to change. A constant balance will be needed between preservation and progress, between the old and the new." "And that will be Moon's role?" questioned Richard, feeling a paternal concern mixed with pride. "It will be the role of all of you," corrected the shaman. "Moon is the center, the direct connection with the guardians, but she will need support. A child should not carry such responsibility alone, even a child like her." Grandma Martha took her son's hand between hers. "We were waiting for you, Richard. The family needs to be united for the balance to be maintained. Claire knew this. That's why, even knowing she would leave this world early, she chose to have Moon. She trusted that one day you would understand and return." The words hit Richard deeply. All these years, he had believed that Claire had departed without purpose, a random tragedy that destroyed his world. Now he understood that even that loss had a greater meaning within the mountain's plan. "I will stay," he declared, his voice firm with new conviction. "We all will stay. Oakridge is our home, and we'll care for it together." The Guardians, as if understanding and approving his decision, emitted their characteristic sounds in unison, a wild and powerful chorus that echoed through the valley. Moon laughed, delighted, and then, to everyone's surprise, she rose from her chair. With faltering but determined steps, she took her first steps without support, walking to the silver wolf, who lowered its head to receive her embrace. "Moon!" exclaimed Richard, amazed. "You're walking." "The Guardians healed me, Daddy," she explained, radiant. "They said I'll need to explore many paths in the mountains, and they would give me the legs for it." Grandma Martha and Grandpa Anthony embraced, too emotional to speak. Joe nodded, as if he had always known this would happen. As the last ray of sunlight disappeared on the horizon, the stars began to dot the sky over Oakridge Mountains. Below in town, people looked up at the mountaintop, where 4 distinct lights now shone: silver, golden, spotted, and white. The ancient stories that grandparents told their grandchildren would gain new meaning in the years that followed. Ancient Stone Valley would be declared a natural sanctuary, protected not only by human laws, but by forces older and wiser. At the center of these changes would be a family reunited by destiny, guided by a small guardian who understood the language of the mountain. And Moon, the girl who had once been limited to a wheelchair, now ran freely along the slopes of the mountains, accompanied by guardians invisible to most, but always present for those who knew how to see. The ancient song would echo for generations, reminding everyone that balance is fragile and precious, that nature has its own guardians, and that purity of heart can awaken forces that the modern world has forgotten. In the years that followed, Thompson would abandon his plans for the resort and, influenced by the transformative experience in the cave, establish the first environmental conservation foundation in Oakridge. Richard would reopen his practice in town, dividing his time between healing people and helping to heal the land. Grandpa Anthony would carve images of the 4 guardians that would become symbols of the renewed town, and Grandma Martha, sitting in her rocking chair, would observe with serene satisfaction as Moon grew, strong and wise, a living bridge between worlds, her father's science and the ancestral magic of her maternal lineage. On certain nights when the moon was full and the wind whispered through the valleys, the more sensitive residents would swear they saw a small girl running along the slopes with 4 majestic figures: a wolf, an eagle, a jaguar, and a deer guarding her steps. The moonstone would continue to shine on the little guardian's chest, its power not to control, but to balance, not to dominate, but to harmonize. A constant reminder that true power comes, not from conquest, but from understanding, not from strength, but from wisdom. And so Oakridge Mountains began to breathe in harmony with its guardians once more. The balance was restored, the ancient promises renewed. The song of the mountain, so long forgotten, echoed again through the valleys and peaks, carried by the wind to all who had hearts open enough to hear it. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from.